name is Agatha Brown. I am 33 years old, and the last thing my mother ever called me in public was a genetic defect. We were standing in the grand ballroom of the Beverly Hills Hotel. 300 guests clinked crystal glasses all around us. I wore a tailored navy gown holding a glass of sparkling water I had barely touched. My mother, Dr. Evelyn Brown, chief of cardiology, marched up to me with a face resembling frozen concrete. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I had been during our 8 years of silence. She leaned in close so her wealthy colleagues at the next table would not hear the venom in her voice. "Why is this defect here?" They thought I was a desperate gatecrasher begging for a plate of food. They had no idea I was the only reason this wedding even existed. Before the guards could take a single step toward me, the groom walked over. Dr. Julian Pierce looked at my mother. Then he looked at Victoria. His jaw tightened, and his face turned rigid with a furious kind of clarity. "How dare you?" Julian said loudly. His voice cut through the soft jazz music, silencing the front tables instantly. "This woman is—" I smiled, holding up a single finger to cut him off. I looked right into my mother's terrified eyes, watching the sudden realization hit her that she was standing on a trap door. "You have no idea, do you?" I asked her softly. What happened next brought down a medical dynasty that took 3 decades to build, and I never raised my voice a single time. Welcome back to Grape Vengeance, where quiet women finally tell the stories their families hoped would stay buried. If you have ever been pruned from your own family tree so someone else could steal the sunlight, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are watching from today, and be sure to subscribe. To understand how that Beverly Hills ballroom became a courtroom, you have to understand a dining room table 8 years earlier. In the Brown family, love was a paycheck you only received if you wore a white coat. My father, Richard, was a renowned orthopedic surgeon. Victoria, 2 years older than me, was a medical resident on the fast track to becoming a plastic surgeon. I was 25, exhausted, and holding a rejection letter from my 3rd medical school. It was a Sunday evening. The roast was still steaming on the fine china. My mother tapped her wine glass with a silver spoon. She did not look at me. She looked only at Victoria. "To our only successful daughter," my mother announced, her voice echoing in the large room, "the Brown legacy is safe with you." My father raised his glass in silent agreement, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I sat there with my hands trembling under the table. When I cleared my throat to speak, my mother cut me off with the precision of a scalpel. "An ugly high school grad who cannot even pass the entrance exams has no voice at this table," my mother stated, setting her glass down. "You are a defect in this bloodline." Victoria smirked, slicing her steak. Nobody defended me. The silence in that room carried more weight than any insult they could have thrown. That night, I realized my family did not just want me to succeed, they needed me to fail, so I could serve as the dark background to Victoria's shining perfection. I excused myself from the table. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The real nightmare started 2 days later when I came home from work and found my entire life sitting in trash bags on the front lawn. I told you the real nightmare started 2 days later with those trash bags on the lawn. But to truly understand how a mother could throw her own flesh and blood onto the grass like yard waste, you need to hear what happened the rest of that Sunday night. You need to see the silent war my sister waged in the shadows. After my mother called me a genetic defect at the dining table, the room went still. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the cooling gravy on my plate. I waited for my father to say something. Richard Brown was a man who commanded operating rooms with a single look. He could fix shattered spines. I hoped, just for a second, he might fix this. He picked up his linen napkin, wiped the corners of his mouth, and placed it neatly next to his fork. He looked at me, not with anger, but with something far worse. He looked at me with deep, chilling indifference. "Your mother is speaking facts, Agatha," he said, his voice as smooth as glass. "We are a family of exceptional performers. I run orthopedic surgery, Evelyn commands cardiology, Victoria is already turning heads in her plastic surgery residency. We deal in excellence, you deal in excuses. We cannot afford to have a failure dragging down the family brand." He called our family a brand, not a home, not a bloodline, a brand. Victoria took a slow sip of her red wine. She rested her chin on her hand, pretending to look sympathetic. It was the exact expression she practiced in the mirror to use on her wealthy patients. "It is just so embarrassing for us," Victoria sighed. "I had to tell my chief resident that you did not even make the wait list for the third time. He actually laughed. Maybe you should just settle for something simpler. You could be a receptionist at a clinic, or maybe a medical transcriptionist. You type fast, right?" She knew exactly where to slide the knife. She knew I had spent the last 4 years drowning in student debt for my undergraduate biology degree, studying until 2 in the morning, trying to force my brain to conquer the entrance exams. I had the drive. I had the passion. I just froze during standardized testing. My mind would go blank under the ticking clock of an exam room. But in a real clinic, holding a real patient's hand, I knew exactly what to do. None of that mattered to them. If it did not come with a framed diploma from an Ivy League school, it was garbage. I stood up from the table. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor. I gathered their dirty plates, stacking them one by one. I did not cry. Crying was a sign of weakness in the Brown household, and weakness invited more attacks. I carried the heavy stack of porcelain into the kitchen, the smell of expensive prime rib turning my stomach. I washed their dishes, I dried their crystal glasses, I played the role of the quiet servant because it was the only role they allowed me to have. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed. My room still had the same pale yellow wallpaper from when I was 12 years old. They never allowed me to redecorate. They said I had not earned the right to make demands about the house. On my small wooden desk sat the thin white envelope containing my latest medical school rejection. I ran my thumb over the raised seal of the university. The door creaked open without a knock. Victoria stood in the doorway wearing her silk pajamas. She leaned against the frame, crossing her arms. "You know they are right, Agatha," she whispered. Her voice carried no warmth. It was flat and hollow. "You are wasting your time. You are 25 years old and you are still sleeping in a child's bed in our parents' house. It is pathetic." I looked up at her. "Why do you care, Victoria? You have everything they want. Why do you need to kick me when I am already down?" She stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the space. She looked at my closet, my window, the floor space. She was not looking at me. She was measuring the room. "Because I need a home office," she said plainly. "I am starting to consult with high-end cosmetic clients privately. I cannot bring them to my cramped apartment. This room gets the best morning light. It would make a perfect consultation space. But you are sitting here taking up square footage you do not deserve." I stared at my sister. She did not want me to find my own path. She wanted my bedroom. She wanted me evicted so she could put a leather sofa where my bed stood. "I am paying rent," I reminded her. "I pay Mom and Dad $300 a month for my clinic job." Victoria laughed, a harsh metallic sound. $300 is a rounding error for them. You are a charity case, and trust me, Agatha, charity runs out. She turned and walked down the hall, leaving my door wide open. I sat in the dark for a long time, gripping the edges of my mattress. I knew I had to get out. I needed to save enough money for a security deposit on a cheap apartment. I figured I had a few weeks. I figured I could pick up extra weekend shifts at the physical therapy center to make the cash. Monday morning arrived. I drove my beat-up sedan to the rundown clinic in East Los Angeles. It was worlds away from the Beverly Hills mansions my parents visited. The paint was peeling off the walls. The equipment was outdated. But the patients were real. They were factory workers, retired teachers, and veterans. They did not care about prestige. They just wanted the pain to stop. My first patient was a 60-year-old retired mechanic named Arthur. He had undergone a complex spinal fusion surgery 3 weeks prior, and the surgeon who performed it was none other than my father, Dr. Richard Brown. My father was a mechanical genius in the operating room. He could rebuild a spine with titanium screws faster than anyone on the West Coast. But the moment the patient was stitched up, my father washed his hands of them. He provided zero guidance for aftercare. He dumped them into the system and moved on to the next high-paying procedure. Arthur was suffering. His surgical incision was healing poorly. His mobility was worse than before the surgery. He sat on the treatment table, his calloused hands gripping his knees, his eyes filled with defeat. "The great doctor fixed my bones," Arthur muttered, staring at the floor, "but he did not tell me how to live in this body again. I cannot walk to my mailbox, Agatha. I think I am broken for good." I knelt in front of him. I did not see a broken man. I saw a failure in the medical system. My parents focused on the expensive, glamorous part of medicine. They ignored the grueling, messy reality of recovery. They viewed patients as stepping stones for their own legacy. "You are not broken, Arthur," I said, looking him directly in the eyes. "The system failed you, but I am not going to let you fall through the cracks. We are going to rebuild your strength, step by step." I spent the next 2 hours working with him. I adjusted his posture. I guided him through resistance band exercises. I showed him how to shift his weight to protect his spine. By the end of the session, he walked across the room without his cane. It was a small victory, but the look of pure gratitude on his face hit me harder than any medical degree ever could. I realized something profound in that rundown clinic. My mother called me a defect. My father called me a failure. My sister called me a charity case. But I possessed the one crucial skill they all lacked. I had empathy. I had the patience to stay with the broken pieces until they fit back together. I stayed late that night writing notes on Arthur's recovery. I started sketching out a specific post-operative care protocol, a system that caught patients right as they left the hospital, ensuring they healed correctly. I did not know it then, but I was drafting the blueprint for Apex recovery. I felt a spark of hope. I felt like I finally had a direction. That hope lasted exactly 24 hours. Tuesday evening, the sky was painted a deep, bruised purple as I drove back to the Beverly Hills neighborhood. The manicured lawns and towering palm trees felt suffocating. I turned onto my street, exhausted but determined. I planned to sit down with my parents, explain my new focus on physical therapy, and ask for 1 month to save up for my own apartment. I steered my car up the long concrete driveway. The headlights swept across the pristine green grass of our front yard. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched against the pavement. Sitting on the dew-covered lawn, illuminated by the porch light, were 4 heavy black plastic trash bags. Next to them sat my small wooden desk lamp and a cardboard box, spilling over with my winter sweaters. My chest tightened so hard I could barely draw a breath. I put the car in park and stepped out into the cool evening air. The front door of the house was locked. The interior lights were on. I could see the shadows of my family moving in the living room, drinking their evening tea safe inside their expensive fortress. They did not even have the courage to hand me an eviction notice. They just threw my life away while I was at work. I walked slowly toward the pile of black plastic on the grass. The reality of my situation crashed over me cold and unforgiving. I was entirely alone, and the countdown to my revenge had just officially begun. I stood on the damp grass, the evening dew soaking straight through my cheap canvas shoes. My entire life was reduced to 4 black plastic bags sitting next to the sprinkler head. The porch light flicked off, leaving me standing in the shadows of the estate. I stared at the bags, my chest tightening until drawing a breath felt like swallowing crushed glass. They wanted me to come inside, just so they could watch me leave. I marched up the concrete steps and pushed the heavy oak front door open. It was unlocked. Evelyn stood in the marble foyer, her arms crossed tight over her pale cashmere sweater. Her posture was rigid, her face an unreadable mask. Richard stood 2 steps behind her, checking the time on his expensive silver watch. "You have exactly 1 hour to get the rest of your items off this property," my mother stated. Her voice held the exact same clinical detachment she used when delivering a poor prognosis to a patient. I looked at my father, waiting for a single shred of parental instinct to break through his tailored suit. I waited for him to stop this. "We are reallocating your living expenses to Victoria's new practice," Richard said from the doorway, meeting my gaze without a flinch. "An empty room generates no revenue. Victoria needs the space to consult with clients. You are an adult, Agatha. It is time you stop draining our resources." They were not just kicking me out, they were liquidating me. They treated their own daughter like a failed business venture that needed to be written off before the next quarter. I walked past them without saying a single word. I climbed the curved wooden staircase, my hand trailing along the polished banister for the very last time. When I reached my bedroom at the end of the hall, the wooden door was already unhinged and leaning against the wall. Victoria stood in the center of the room, holding a brass measuring tape. She wore her crisp white medical coat, a garment she insisted on wearing even inside the house. It was her armor. It was her proof of superiority. "I think the mahogany desk will go right over the window," Victoria said, pulling the metal tape across the carpet. She did not even bother to look up as I walked in. The natural lighting will be perfect for before and after photos of my cosmetic clients. I ignored her. I walked straight to the small wooden nightstand tucked in the corner. It was the only piece of furniture she had not shoved out into the hallway. I opened the bottom drawer, pushing aside old textbooks and loose papers. Inside rested a heavy brass compass. My grandmother Clara was a combat nurse. She spent her youth patching up soldiers in field tents, working with mud on her boots and blood covering her hands. She despised the superficial country club lifestyle my parents worshipped. Clara always told me that real medicine was about healing the broken, not showing off the shiny. I remembered the afternoon she pressed this compass into my palm. Her breathing was ragged, her skin pale, but her eyes held a fierce fire. "You have a spine of steel," Agatha Clara had whispered, gripping my fingers tight around the cold metal. "Do not let them bend you. They only care about the metals. You care about the soldiers. Use this to find your true north." I gripped the cold brass in my hand and slipped it deep into my jacket pocket. It was the only inheritance that mattered. My parents inherited the bank accounts and the real estate, but I inherited Clara's grit. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet floor and threw in my remaining scrubs, a pair of jeans, and my toothbrush. Victoria watched me, a smug smile playing on her lips. She let the measuring tape snap back into its casing with a sharp crack. "It really is for the best, Agatha," Victoria said smoothly. "You were suffocating in our shadow. Now you can go find a nice, simple job, settle down with a nice, simple man. You will be much happier living within your limitations." I zipped the duffel bag closed. The metal teeth caught on a loose thread and I yanked the zipper hard, the sound sharp and violent in the empty room. I slung the heavy strap over my shoulder and walked right past her. I did not beg for more time. Begging is for people who believe the other side has a heart. My family only had ledgers. I carried the bag down the stairs. My parents stood near the front door, silent sentinels, making sure the eviction proceeded exactly on schedule. "Leave the house keys on the console table," my mother instructed, pointing a manicured finger at the glass table in the hall. I reached into my pocket, unclipped the brass key from my ring, and dropped it onto the glass. It landed with a loud final clink. I walked out the front door and stepped onto the porch. The cool California night wind brushed against my face. Victoria stepped out behind me, leaning against the wooden pillar. "You will be begging us for a loan in 6 months," Victoria laughed, her voice carrying across the quiet, wealthy neighborhood. "When you cannot make rent, do not call here. We are changing the phone numbers." I stopped at the bottom of the brick steps. I did not turn around to give her the satisfaction of seeing my face. I squeezed the brass compass in my pocket, feeling the etched metal dig into my palm. I walked to my beat-up sedan, loaded the plastic trash bags into the trunk, and slammed the lid shut. I got into the driver's seat and turned the key. The old engine sputtered, coughing twice before roaring to life. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the Beverly Hills estate. I looked in the rearview mirror and watched the massive house shrink into the darkness. I had $400 in my checking account. I was officially disowned, erased from the family records with a single stroke of cruelty. The highway stretched out in front of me, illuminated only by the harsh yellow glow of the streetlights. My gas tank hovered near empty. I had no apartment waiting for me. I had no safety net. I drove toward East Los Angeles, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I pulled into a cheap motel parking lot just off the interstate. The neon vacancy sign flickered, buzzing like an angry hornet in the quiet night. I paid $40 in cash for a room that smelled like stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. I carried my duffel bag inside, locked the deadbolt, and slid the chain into place. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress. The old metal springs groaned loudly under my weight. I took the brass compass out of my pocket and set it on the chipped wooden bedside table. In the Brown family, grief was an unacceptable emotion. But sitting in that rundown motel room, a deep, heavy ache settled into my chest. They did not just kick me out in a fit of rage. They planned it. They waited until I was exhausted from working a minimum wage shift, bagged up my belongings like refuse, and assigned my space to the golden child. I watched the neon light blink through the thin, dusty curtains. I realized something crucial in that dark room. My mother and father built their empire on prestige. They catered to the wealthy, the elite, the people who could hand over thick stacks of cash for a new nose or a reconstructed knee. They focused entirely on the surgery. They ignored the foundation of care. I had $360 left to my name. One wrong move, one flat tire, one missed paycheck, and I would be sleeping in my car. But I also possessed a freedom I had never tasted before. I no longer had to audition for a seat at their table. They took away my chair, so I was going to build my own dining room. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the small, wobbly desk in the corner of the motel room. I pulled a cheap spiral notebook from my bag and grabbed a pen. I started writing down everything I knew about patient recovery, everything my father ignored, everything Victoria laughed at. I mapped out the gaps in their brilliant medical system. Grief did not bury me. It poured a concrete foundation for what I was about to build. The tears dried up, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. They thought they threw me in the dirt. They did not realize I was a seed. The next morning, I drove straight to the physical therapy clinic. I walked through the glass doors with my spine straight, the brass compass heavy in my pocket. I was ready to start digging. And the very first thing I discovered on that clinic floor was a critical flaw in my parents' medical ecosystem. It was a flaw that would eventually become my greatest weapon. The next 3 years tested every ounce of grit Clara handed down to me. I moved into a cramped studio apartment in East Los Angeles. The rent was cheap because the single window overlooked a noisy alleyway and the old radiator hissed all night long. I slept on a used futon. I ate ramen noodles and canned beans. My days started in the dark and ended long after the streetlights flickered on. I worked double shifts as a care coordinator at that rundown physical therapy center, taking every extra hour the manager offered. This was not the sterile, polished world of Beverly Hills medicine. My parents operated in pristine surgical suites with classical music playing in the background. They dealt with wealthy clients and state-of-the-art equipment. I dealt with the aftermath. I operated in the trenches. Working in that neglected clinic is where I uncovered the fatal flaw in my parents' grand empire. It was a dark reality the top-tier medical community worked very hard to ignore. Brilliant surgeons like my mother and father would perform incredibly expensive procedures. They would cut, stitch, and bill the insurance companies for astronomical sums. Then they would discharge the patient. That was the end of their responsibility. They dumped fragile, recovering people into an abyss of inadequate post-operative care. I saw the collateral damage every single day. Patients arrived at my clinic terrified and in chronic pain. They were failing. They were tearing fresh sutures, re-injuring delicate tissues, and losing their mobility. Not because the initial surgery failed, but because the system abandoned them the moment they left the recovery ward. One Tuesday morning, an elderly woman named Helen came through our glass doors. She was trembling. She had recently undergone a complex heart valve replacement. The surgeon on her file was a direct colleague of my mother, Dr. Evelyn Brown. Helen was given a generic pamphlet on physical activity and sent home. Nobody told her how to monitor her specific heart rate variations during basic household tasks. Nobody guided her through the psychological terror of feeling her chest ache after a major operation. She was readmitted to the emergency room twice in 1 month just for severe anxiety and minor muscle strain. The hospital labeled Helen as a difficult patient. I saw her as a victim of a fractured machine. I started taking rigorous notes. The cheap spiral notebook from my motel room turned into a stack of yellow legal pads, which eventually evolved into a complex digital database. I stayed at the clinic until midnight, cross-referencing patient charts. I tracked every failed discharge in our district. I logged every ignored symptom. I mapped out every single gap in the transition from the hospital bed to the living room couch. I realized that healing did not happen under the bright lights of an operating room. True healing happened in the quiet, agonizing weeks that followed. I used my collected data to design a highly specific proprietary care regimen. I built a transition framework that started before the patient even left the hospital. It required daily check-ins, specialized movement metrics, and rigorous psychological support. I tested the framework on the patients assigned to my specific schedule. The results were undeniable. Within 6 months, the patients following my exact regimen healed faster. Their pain levels dropped significantly. Most importantly, I tracked a 40% reduction in hospital readmissions among my group. I printed the data. I placed it in a neat professional binder. I decided to call my system Apex Recovery. I knew this framework could revolutionize postoperative care in California. It could save hospitals millions of dollars in readmission penalties. More importantly, it could give people their dignity back. But knowing the solution and getting the medical elite to listen are two very different battles. I spent my mornings, before my clinic shifts began, cold calling hospital administrators. I bought one sharp professional gray suit from a local thrift store and ironed it every night. I drove my old sedan to towering medical complexes, sitting in waiting rooms for hours, just to get 5 minutes with a mid-level director. They all reacted the exact same way. They would look at my data, their eyes would widen at the 40% reduction statistic, then they would look at my resume. They saw the lack of a medical degree. They saw the title of care coordinator at a low-income clinic. The respect would vanish from their faces, replaced by a patronizing smirk. "You have some interesting ideas, Miss Brown," a senior administrator at a major private hospital told me during one particularly humiliating meeting. He slid my binder back across his polished mahogany table. "But we require our program directors to hold a medical doctorate. We do not implement structural overhauls based on the theories of a clinic assistant. Keep up the good work in East LA." He practically laughed me out of his office. He treated me like a child playing with a toy stethoscope. I walked back to my hot, suffocating car. I did not cry. I gripped the steering wheel and stared at the towering hospital building. They were blinded by the same arrogant prestige that infected my parents. They worshiped the letters after a name instead of the tangible results on a page. I went back to my cheap apartment that night. I sat at my wobbly desk, exhausted down to my bones. The radiator hissed. The alleyway smelled like garbage. I looked at the heavy brass compass sitting on my desk, pressing down a stack of unpaid electric bills. I picked it up. The cold metal grounded me. I remembered my grandmother Clara standing in the dirt, saving lives, while the decorated generals sat in clean tents miles away from the front line. She never needed a fancy title to do the grueling work. I realized I did not need a medical degree to fix a broken medical system. I just needed to care more than the arrogant doctors who threw me away. I did not need their permission to implement Apex Recovery. I needed to build my own facility. I needed to own the building, hire my own staff, and force the hospitals to send their patients to me because my results would become too undeniable to ignore. To do that, I needed capital. I needed real money. I spent the next 3 months refining my business plan. I transformed my clinical data into a bulletproof financial projection. I mapped out the overhead costs for leasing a medium-sized commercial space, purchasing the proper rehabilitation equipment, and hiring a small team of dedicated therapists. The numbers were intimidating, but the potential profit margins for a dedicated post-op center were staggering. I just needed one bank to believe in the math. I scheduled a meeting with a regional commercial bank known for funding healthcare startups. I rehearsed my pitch until my throat was raw. I walked into the loan officer's suite feeling more confident than I had in years. The officer reviewed my prospectus carefully. He loved the business plan. He told me the numbers were solid and the market demand was obvious. He shook my hand and essentially guaranteed the approval of a $150,000 loan. I walked out of that bank feeling like I had finally broken the curse. I was going to open the first official Apex Recovery Center. I had a clear path forward. I had a future that did not involve serving as the quiet shadow to my sister's shining success. I was so focused on the horizon that I forgot to watch my back. I forgot that the Brown family brand demanded absolute superiority. I did not realize that the moment my name popped up in the local financial sector, an alarm bell rang in a very specific, very dangerous office. My sister Victoria was not content with merely taking my bedroom. She was actively monitoring my failure, and the second she realized I was about to succeed, she set a trap designed to destroy everything I had sacrificed 3 years to build. I spent the week before my bank appointment tasting a victory I had earned entirely in the shadows. I found the perfect commercial space for the first official Apex Recovery Clinic. It was a former yoga studio situated in a quiet strip mall on the edge of Pasadena. The space featured wide windows, natural light, and open hardwood floors that would easily accommodate rehabilitation mats and parallel bars. I stood in the empty room, smelling the lingering scent of eucalyptus and old wax, mapping out exactly where the reception desk would go. Everything hinged on the regional bank loan. A mid-level administrator at Mercy General Hospital had reviewed my data and offered a tentative contract. He promised to send his orthopedic discharge patients to my care program, but he gave me a strict 30-day deadline to secure a physical facility and hire 2 certified therapists. If I missed the deadline, the hospital would sign with a corporate chain instead. I needed $150,000 to secure the lease purchase medical-grade equipment and cover the initial payroll. I walked into the Pacific Trust Bank wearing my single gray thrift store suit. The loan officer, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, reviewed my printed prospectus. He traced the profit projections with his silver pen, nodding slowly. He looked at the 40% reduction in hospital readmissions. He saw the tentative contract from Mercy General. "You have built a remarkable financial model here, Miss Brown," Mr. Henderson said, closing the leather folder. "Startups are usually a gamble, but your overhead is low and your client pipeline is already secured. The underwriting team greenlit the figures yesterday. We just need the final background check to clear the compliance department. I will have the final paperwork ready for your signature tomorrow at noon." I shook his hand, feeling a surge of pure electricity travel up my arm. I walked out of the bank and sat in my old sedan, gripping the steering wheel. I had done it. I had beaten the system that discarded me. The next morning, I woke up at dawn. I ironed my gray suit again. I practiced my signature on a scrap piece of paper, wanting the ink to look decisive when I signed the commercial lease. At 10 in the morning, my cheap, prepaid cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed Pacific Trust Bank. I answered on the first ring, expecting Mr. Henderson to confirm our appointment. Instead, I heard a thick, uncomfortable silence on the line. "Miss Brown," Henderson said. His tone was tight, lacking the warm professionalism from the day before. He sounded like a man reading a hostage script. "I am calling to inform you that Pacific Trust is withdrawing the loan offer. We are canceling the noon appointment." The air vanished from my lungs. I squeezed the phone, my mind racing through the financial documents, searching for a math error I might have missed. "There must be a mistake," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You told me the underwriters approved the figures. The hospital contract is verified. The numbers are fine," he replied quickly, too quickly. "The rejection came from our senior compliance division. Your application was flagged this morning as a critical liability. I am sorry, but the decision is final. We cannot do business with you." He hung up before I could ask another question. The dial tone buzzed against my ear like a wasp. A critical liability. Banks use that specific phrasing when they suspect severe fraud, criminal activity, or impending bankruptcy. I had zero debt outside of my student loans. I paid my rent on time. I had never even received a speeding ticket. I refused to accept a vague rejection. People who accept closed doors usually end up sleeping on the streets, and I was never going back to the dirt. I spent the next 2 weeks digging. I returned to the bank and waited in the lobby until Mr. Henderson walked out for his lunch break. I cornered him near the corner coffee stand. I did not yell. I just looked him dead in the eye and asked him to treat me like a human being. He looked around nervously, terrified of losing his pension, and handed me a single clue. He whispered that a senior executive in the commercial lending department had placed a manual block on my file. The executive claimed to have a reliable character reference proving I was an unstable risk. Mr. Henderson gave me the executive's first name, Marcus. I went back to my cramped apartment, opened my outdated laptop, and launched a relentless digital investigation. I scoured the bank's corporate directory. I found a Marcus Sterling listed as the vice president of regional lending. I searched his name on every social media platform available. His profiles were mostly private, shielded behind privacy settings meant to keep the public out. But arrogant people always leave a digital trail because they love to be seen. I searched charity gala registries in the Beverly Hills area, cross-referencing his name with recent high society events. It took me 4 hours to find the photograph. It was a digital spread from a local country club fundraiser held 3 weeks prior. The image showed Marcus Sterling wearing a tailored tuxedo, holding a glass of expensive champagne. Standing right next to him, her arm looped intimately through his, was my sister, Victoria. The caption identified them as a new couple. I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes burned. The puzzle pieces snapped together with sickening precision. Victoria was dating the vice president of the exact bank I applied to. She must have been in his office, or perhaps she saw my name on a pending approval memo while glancing at his phone. She recognized the Apex recovery application. She did not just tell Marcus to deny the loan. I used my clinic contacts to quietly pull a favor with a former patient who worked in corporate data security. He managed to glimpse the internal compliance note attached to my flagged file. The note stated the applicant was a medical school dropout with a severe history of unrecorded workplace theft and psychological instability. Victoria poisoned my name. She deliberately fabricated a narrative depicting me as an embezzler and a mental health risk. She knew a commercial bank would never hand $150,000 to a liability. My own sister was not satisfied with stealing my bedroom. She was not satisfied with watching our parents throw my belongings onto the lawn. She needed to ensure I stayed at the bottom. She needed me to be destroyed so she would never have to look over her shoulder and see me climbing the ladder she claimed to own. I sat in my beat-up sedan parked outside the physical therapy clinic. The California sun beat down on the metal roof, turning the interior into a furnace. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the worn leather dig into my palms. My knuckles turned stark white. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a waste of hydration, and I needed every drop of energy in my body for what came next. They thought they could lock me out of the traditional financial system. They thought cutting off my access to regional banks would force me to fold my hand and walk away. They underestimated the exact thing they created when they kicked me out of that mansion. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass compass Clara gave me. The metal was warm against my skin. The needle pointed straight ahead. I realized traditional banks were useless anyway. They relied on red tape nepotism and country club connections. If I wanted to build an empire that could rival the Brown family legacy, I needed untraceable capital. I needed investors who did not care about Beverly Hills gossip. I needed people who only cared about raw, unfiltered results. I let go of the steering wheel. I grabbed my laptop from the passenger seat, flipped the screen open, and connected to the clinic's weak wireless signal. I closed the tab, showing Victoria smiling with her banker boyfriend. I opened a fresh search window. I began compiling a list of private equity firms, angel investors, and independent venture capitalists in the greater Los Angeles area. I shifted my entire strategy. The secret sabotage did not stop my momentum. It weaponized my ambition. I was done playing by their rules. I was about to enter a completely different game, and my first major piece was about to roll right through the front doors of my rundown clinic in a titanium wheelchair. I spent the next 3 weeks sending cold emails to venture capital firms from my wobbly desk in the East Los Angeles clinic. I received nothing but automated rejections. My timeline to secure the Mercy General Hospital contract was evaporating. The pressure tightened in my chest every time I looked at the calendar. I needed a miracle, but I knew miracles did not exist in the medical field. You have to manufacture your own luck. My luck rolled through the clinic doors on a rainy Thursday afternoon. A sleek black town car parked illegally on the cracked pavement out front. A driver in a dark suit stepped out, opened the rear door, and unfolded a titanium wheelchair. He assisted a man into the chair and pushed him through our glass doors. The man in the chair was Thomas Vance. Even wearing a simple gray tracksuit, Thomas commanded the room. He was 58 years old, the founder of a highly successful software development firm in Silicon Valley. I recognized his face from the cover of several business magazines. 6 months prior, a horrific skiing accident shattered his lower spine. I took his medical file from the driver and scanned the surgical notes. The primary neurosurgeon listed on the document was Dr. Harrison Miller, a close colleague of my father. They ran in the same Beverly Hills country club circles. Dr. Miller had fused the shattered vertebrae using state-of-the-art titanium rods. The surgery was technically flawless, but the post-operative notes made my blood boil. Dr. Miller wrote that Thomas suffered severe nerve trauma. The file stated the patient would never walk unassisted again. The elite surgical team essentially told a brilliant, driven man to buy a comfortable wheelchair and learn to live with paralysis. They stitched him up, collected their enormous fee, and discarded him. Thomas looked at me, his eyes hollow and exhausted. My assistant found your clinic online, Thomas said, his voice raspy. I read a forum post from a retired mechanic named Arthur. He said you gave him his legs back. Dr. Miller told me I am chasing ghosts. He said physical therapy is a waste of my time. Tell me the truth, Agatha. Am I wasting my time in this dump? I set the medical file down on the reception desk. I walked around the counter and knelt right in front of his wheelchair, looking him dead in the eye. Dr. Miller is a mechanic, I told him firmly. He bolted your spine back together, and he did a fine job with the hardware, but he does not understand the software of the human body. Your nerves are traumatized, not dead. If you are willing to endure more pain than you have ever felt in your life, I can get you out of this chair. But you have to follow my exact protocol. No exceptions. Thomas stared at me for a long moment. He saw the determination in my face. He nodded slowly. We started the Apex Recovery Protocol the very next morning. The following 8 months tested both of us to our absolute limits. I applied every single metric I had researched. We started with micro movements, forcing his brain to reconnect with the damaged nerve pathways in his legs. It was agonizing work. I remember a bleak Tuesday in late October. The rain pounded against the thin clinic windows. Thomas was strapped into the parallel bars, his arms shaking under his own weight. His legs refused to respond to his commands. He collapsed onto the safety mat, his face pale and dripping with sweat. He punched the floor, his frustration boiling over. "I am done!" Thomas shouted, gasping for air. "Miller was right. I am a cripple chasing a fantasy. Call my driver. I am going home." I did not call his driver. I walked over, sat on the mat next to him, and pulled the heavy brass compass from my pocket. I placed it in his trembling hand. "My grandmother was a combat nurse," I said quietly. "She used this to navigate through literal war zones to find wounded soldiers the generals had written off as casualties. The elites in those pristine hospitals wrote you off, Thomas. They decided your story was over. Are you really going to let a man in a tailored suit dictate the rest of your life?" Thomas looked at the compass. He tightened his grip around the cold metal. He did not say another word. He just reached up, grabbed the parallel bars, and pulled himself back to a standing position. The breakthrough happened on Christmas Eve. The clinic was empty. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the worn hardwood floors. Thomas stood at the far end of the room, holding a single wooden cane. He took a breath, shifted his weight, and stepped forward. His right foot planted firmly, then his left. He walked 20 feet across the room without holding the rails. His gait was slow and uneven, but he was walking. He reached the reception desk, turning to face me. Tears streamed down his weathered face. He looked down at his own legs as if he were meeting them for the first time. "You gave me my life back, Agatha," he whispered. I smiled, wiping a stray tear from my own cheek. "You did the work, Thomas. I just built the map." He leaned against the desk, his sharp business instincts kicking in as he surveyed the peeling paint and outdated equipment around us. "Your protocol is a medical marvel," Thomas stated, his tone shifting back to the ruthless CEO he was known to be. "Why are you operating out of a rundown strip mall? You should have a 50,000 square foot facility. You should be licensing this program to every major hospital on the West Coast. What is stopping you?" I poured him a cup of water. I decided to tell him the unfiltered truth. I explained the Mercy General contract. I explained the regional bank loan. And then I explained Victoria. I detailed how my own sister poisoned my name at the compliance office to ensure I stayed destitute. Thomas listened intently. He did not offer pity. Billionaires do not deal in pity. They deal in solutions. He finished his water, picked up his cane, and walked toward the glass doors. "Have a Merry Christmas, Agatha," Thomas said, pulling his coat tight. "Keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow." I locked up the clinic and drove back to my freezing apartment. I did not expect anything to happen. I assumed Thomas would connect me with a mid-level investor or perhaps offer a modest personal loan. The next morning, I opened my laptop and logged into my new corporate banking portal. The screen loaded. I stopped breathing. The account balance displayed $2 million. It was a direct wire transfer from Vance Holdings, LLC. An email notification chimed on my phone a second later. The message was from Thomas. It contained a single sentence, "Build your empire, Agatha." I sat alone in my studio apartment, staring at the 7 figures on the glowing screen. My sister thought she locked the door on my future. She did not realize she forced me to find the person who owned the entire building. The next 3 years moved with blinding speed. The $2 million acted as rocket fuel for Apex recovery. I bypassed the regional banks entirely. I secured a towering commercial space in downtown Los Angeles for our flagship center. I purchased the most advanced rehabilitation equipment on the market. I hired elite physical therapists, offering them salaries the corporate hospitals refused to match. The results compounded. Mercy General Hospital signed our exclusive contract. Within 12 months, 2 more major hospitals signed on. They had to. Our readmission rates were drastically lower than any other facility in the state. By the time I turned 30, Apex Recovery exploded into a localized empire. We opened 12 state-of-the-art facilities across California. We became the undeniable gold standard for post-operative care. But I made one strict, unbreakable rule. My name remained entirely out of the press. I operated strictly in the shadows. I hired a brilliant public relations director to serve as the public face of the company. I used a complex web of corporate LLCs to shield my identity as the founder and CEO. If patients or hospital administrators asked who ran Apex, they were given the name of my holding company. I knew my parents. I knew Victoria. If they found out the defect they threw onto the lawn was now a multi-millionaire capturing their market share, they would launch a relentless legal and social campaign to tear me down. They would try to steal the credit, or worse, destroy the brand out of pure spite. I became the phantom queen of their industry. I attended board meetings via secure conference calls. I audited the clinics late at night. I watched the profits soar while my family remained oblivious, continuing to brag about their country club achievements. Apex Recovery generated so much revenue that we launched a philanthropic wing called the Apex Foundation. We began quietly funding under-resourced medical departments that aligned with our vision of holistic patient care. That is how I discovered a struggling trauma department at St. Jude's Hospital. The department was on the verge of bankruptcy, drowning under the weight of outdated equipment and a lack of administrative support. But it was run by a brilliant, fiercely dedicated young surgeon named Dr. Julian Pierce. I reviewed Julian's surgical files. His talent was extraordinary. His dedication to his patients mirrored my own. I decided the Apex Foundation would anonymously fund his entire trauma wing. I had no idea that extending my hand to save his department would put me on a direct collision course with my sister. By the time I blew past my 32nd birthday, Apex Recovery held exclusive operational contracts with the most prestigious hospitals in California. We dictated the post-operative care for thousands of patients. I sat in a high-rise corner office in downtown Los Angeles, pulling the strings of the local healthcare market. Yet, I remained entirely invisible to the public. My executive team handled the press. I handled the strategy. That strategy led me to St. Jude Medical Center. St. Jude was a cornerstone facility serving a dense working-class population. They saw the worst traumas in the city. The emergency surgical department was run by a 34-year-old prodigy named Dr. Julian Pierce. I had my analyst pull his operational records. Julian possessed a rare combination of raw surgical talent and genuine human compassion. He spent his nights putting shattered bodies back together after terrible accidents. But Julian was fighting a losing war. The hospital board cared more about profit margins than survival rates. They slashed his department budget. They fired his support staff. They denied his requests for modern surgical tools. I read a leaked internal memo where Julian practically begged the hospital directors for a specialized trauma suite. The board denied him, citing a lack of projected revenue. They treated a man saving lives like a bad financial investment. It reminded me exactly of how my parents treated me. I decided to intervene. I utilized the philanthropic wing of my company, the Apex Foundation. I structured a sweeping grant program specifically tailored for the St. Jude Trauma Department. I injected $5 million directly into Julian's operating budget. The capital came with one non-negotiable condition. Every patient discharged from his trauma wing must be transitioned directly into the Apex Recovery Protocol. Julian thought he was being rescued by a faceless corporate entity. He received the funding notification and immediately sent a passionate, deeply grateful email to the foundation director. The director forwarded the message to my private inbox. I replied to him using my corporate email address. I signed it simply as Agatha, CEO of Apex. I did not include my last name. Our digital correspondence started formally. Julian submitted required weekly reports detailing his surgical outcomes and patient discharge plans. I replied with logistical adjustments, optimizing the transition from his operating table to my rehabilitation clinics. Quickly, the emails shifted. We began debating medical philosophy. Julian shared my frustration with the arrogant elite surgeons who dumped patients the moment the stitches closed. He respected my rigorous logistical frameworks. I respected his tireless dedication to keeping desperate people alive. We developed a profound professional synergy without ever hearing each other speak. 6 months into the funding program, Julian requested an in-person meeting. He wanted to discuss a streamlined admission process for severe spinal trauma victims. We met at a quiet, upscale coffee shop near his hospital. I arrived early, wearing a sharp-tailored blazer, sitting in a corner booth. When Julian walked in, I recognized him immediately from his hospital staff photo. He looked exhausted. Dark circles framed his eyes, but he carried himself with a quiet, undeniable authority. He sat across from me and ordered a black coffee. He looked at me with genuine admiration. "You are much younger than I expected," Agatha Julian said, offering a warm smile. "When a mysterious foundation drops millions into a dying department, you assume the CEO is an old Wall Street veteran. You built a post-operative machine that is saving my patients. I owe you everything." "You owe me results, Dr. Pierce," I replied, keeping my tone professional but polite. "I provide the funding, you provide the surgical precision. My clinics handle the rest." We spent an hour discussing transition protocols. His mind was razor sharp. He understood exactly how my recovery metrics worked. As the meeting wound down, the conversation drifted into personal territory. Julian loosened his tie and leaned back against the leather booth. "I am actually getting married next month," Julian mentioned, stirring his coffee. "That is part of the reason I want these new protocols locked down. I need my department running smoothly so I can actually take a honeymoon." I offered my congratulations. I asked if his fiancée worked in the medical field. "She does." Julian nodded, a bright spark of pride in his eyes. "She is a plastic surgeon. Brilliant woman. She comes from a very prominent medical legacy. Her father is actually one of my idols, Dr. Richard Brown. You might have heard of him in the orthopedic circles." My heart stopped beating for 2 full seconds. The air in the coffee shop suddenly felt incredibly thin. I gripped my ceramic mug so tightly my fingers ached. Dr. Richard Brown. My father. Julian was marrying my sister Victoria. I stared at the good, honorable man sitting across from me. He had absolutely no idea he was talking to the exiled daughter of the man he idolized. He did not know his future wife was the same vicious woman who threw my belongings onto the lawn and tried to ruin my bank loan. Victoria clearly painted a picture of a perfect, flawless family to secure a high-value husband. I forced my face to remain perfectly neutral. A CEO does not panic. "I am familiar with Dr. Brown's work," I said smoothly, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "He has quite the reputation. He is a pioneer," Julian agreed, completely oblivious to the hurricane spinning inside my head. "The Brown family operates at the highest level of excellence. I am honored to join them." He checked his watch, apologized for running late to his next shift, and paid the bill. We shook hands. He walked out of the coffee shop, heading back to the trauma wing. I sat in that booth for another 20 minutes, letting the terrifying irony of the situation wash over me. The power dynamic was almost poetic. My parents believed they controlled the medical ecosystem of Los Angeles. They believed Victoria was marrying a rising star who would elevate their brand. They thought they were untouchable. They did not know that the rising star relied entirely on my money to function. Julian could not purchase a single scalpel without the Apex Foundation clearing the invoice. I held the absolute financial leash to his entire career. If I pulled my funding, his department would collapse within a month, and his pristine reputation would sink with it. And neither of my parents knew the genetic defect they discarded was the phantom queen running their world. Our professional relationship deepened over the next year. Julian sent me daily updates. He called my corporate line to ask for logistical advice on difficult cases. He trusted me implicitly. I became his most valued professional confidant. Meanwhile, on the weekends, he was sitting at my parents' dining room table, eating off the same fine china I used to wash, listening to them brag about their superiority. Victoria must have lied to him about my existence. If she mentioned me at all, it was likely the same fabricated story she told the bank. She probably told him I was a troubled, distant relative or a runaway who refused help. She needed to keep her image spotless. I went back to my penthouse apartment that evening and poured a glass of sparkling water. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glittering Los Angeles skyline. I held my grandmother's brass compass in my palm. The needle pointed steady and true. I could have destroyed the Brown family right then. I could have terminated the St. Jude contract, bankrupting Julian's department, and sent a corporate memo exposing Victoria's lies. But that would be messy. That would hurt innocent patients. I built Apex to heal people, not to use them as collateral damage in a family feud. I decided to wait. I decided to let them continue building their fragile glass castle right on top of my fault line. The higher they climbed, the harder the eventual fall would be. I did not have to wait long. The universe has a specific way of delivering justice on a silver platter. The delivery arrived at my corporate office on a mundane Tuesday afternoon, hidden inside a stack of routine vendor contracts. A courier dropped off a thick, expensive envelope that would force me to step out of the shadows and walk straight into the lion's den. The collision of my two worlds arrived in the mail on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I sat in my corner office on the 40th floor of the Apex corporate headquarters. The Los Angeles traffic crawled silently far below my floor-to-ceiling windows. I wore a tailored blazer reviewing quarterly expansion reports for our newest physical therapy centers. Everything in my life felt ordered, controlled, and safe. I built a fortress of success to keep the ghosts of my past locked outside. Then my executive assistant walked into the room carrying a stack of sorted mail. She placed a single envelope on top of the pile, noting it looked personal. I picked it up. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope made of heavy, expensive cardstock, the kind of paper that costs a fortune and announces high society events. The address was written in shimmering gold calligraphy. Ms. Agatha Brown, CEO, Apex Recovery. The return address belonged to Dr. Julian Pierce. Julian had sent this to my corporate office. It made perfect sense. I was his anonymous benefactor, the CEO who funded his entire trauma department. He respected our professional relationship. He wanted to invite the woman who saved his career to the most important day of his life. He still had no idea my last name connected me to his fiancée. He just knew me as Agatha. I slid a silver letter opener under the wax seal. The paper parted with a crisp sound. I pulled out the invitation, unfolded the heavy card, and read the elegant gold letters. The honor of your presence is requested at the wedding of Dr. Julian Pierce and Dr. Victoria Brown. The air vanished from my lungs. My fingernails dug into the edges of the cardstock until the thick paper creased under the pressure. Victoria Brown, my sister. Seeing her name printed next to his felt like a physical blow. Victoria had somehow managed to sink her claws into the most honorable, dedicated surgeon in California. Julian was a man who worked 48-hour shifts to save car crash victims. He skipped meals to hold the hands of terrified families in the waiting room. He represented everything good about medicine. Victoria represented everything toxic. She was a woman who treated patients like walking ATMs. She was a woman who measured human worth by the brand of a watch or the zip code of a house. I set the invitation down on my polished mahogany desk. My hands shook. I stared at the gold lettering for a full hour, the quarterly reports entirely forgotten. I faced a choice. I could RSVP no. I could check the decline box and fold the card back into its pristine envelope and have my assistant mail it away. I could stay right here in my beautiful penthouse office. I had millions of dollars in the bank. I had the respect of the entire medical community. I could ignore the family that discarded me, maintain my quiet peace, and let them continue living their separate lives. I did not need to step back into the toxic swamp of the Brown family dynamics. But then I closed my eyes and the memories rushed back, sharp and unyielding. I felt the damp evening grass soaking through my canvas shoes. I saw the 4 black plastic trash bags sitting next to the lawn sprinkler. I heard my mother standing in the marble foyer looking down her nose at me, calling me a genetic defect in front of my father. I heard Victoria laughing from the porch, telling me I would be begging for a loan in 6 months. I remembered sitting in my hot, beat-up sedan outside the regional bank. I remembered the sickening realization that Victoria had intentionally poisoned my name with the compliance officer. She told her banker boyfriend I was an unstable thief just to ensure my business loan failed. She did not just want me out of the house, she wanted me starving in the gutter. Victoria never faced a single consequence for her cruelty. My parents rewarded her behavior. They shielded her. They funded her lifestyle and praised her perfection. Now she was marrying Julian. I opened Julian's personnel file on my computer. I looked at his funding requests, his surgical outcomes, his desperate pleas to the hospital board to approve better equipment for his patients. He was a good man. He was completely blind to the vipers he was marrying into. Victoria was using him. She needed a pristine, respected husband to elevate her own status. She was attaching herself to a host ready to drain his reputation for her own gain. If I stayed home, I was letting her win. If I stayed home, I was allowing my sister to trap a decent man in a marriage built on a foundation of lies. Julian believed he was marrying into a family of medical royalty. He did not know he was marrying into a family of frauds. I reached across my desk and picked up my favorite fountain pen. The brass barrel felt heavy and cold against my fingers, reminding me of the compass my grandmother gave me. I pulled the small RSVP card from the envelope. The ink flowed smoothly across the thick paper as I checked the box marked "Joyfully Accept." I wrote my name in clear, bold letters. I selected the beef entree. I sealed the small return envelope. I stood up from my leather chair, walked out of my corner office, and took the private elevator down to the lobby. I walked over to the brass outgoing mailbox near the reception desk. I held the cream-colored envelope over the slot for one final second. Dropping this letter meant declaring war. It meant stepping out of the shadows. It meant walking into a room filled with 300 wealthy, connected doctors and revealing the phantom queen they had been whispering about for years. I let the envelope slip from my fingers. It hit the bottom of the metal box with a hollow thud. I was not just going to a wedding. I was going to a reckoning. I rode the elevator back up to my office. If I was going to walk into the Beverly Hills Hotel and face the people who threw me away, I needed ammunition. My family traded in secrets and lies. I traded in data. I sat back down at my computer. I opened a secure corporate network portal. I bypassed the standard public searches and logged into the advanced background check software my human resources department used for high-level medical hires. My father had recently bragged to a colleague that Victoria was running a booming, highly lucrative plastic surgery practice in Nevada. He claimed she was booked 6 months in advance. It was the perfect narrative for the Brown legacy. I typed my sister's medical license number into the database. I initiated a deep dive into her Nevada clinic, pulling public health records, patient reviews, and state board disciplinary files. The search algorithm hummed, gathering data from across state lines. The progress bar inched across the screen. I waited, tapping my brass pen against the desk. I knew my sister. I knew her arrogance. Arrogant people always cut corners. They always think the rules apply to everyone else. The screen blinked. The final report populated on my monitor. I leaned forward, reading the summary. My eyes widened. I read the first paragraph again, making sure I did not misinterpret the legal terminology. A slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. My father was lying. Victoria was lying. The booming practice in Nevada did not exist anymore. The document sitting on my screen revealed a secret so destructive it would not just ruin the wedding, it would vaporize the entire Brown family brand in a matter of seconds. I printed the files, the printer whirring as it produced the crisp, undeniable proof of my sister's downfall. I folded the papers and placed them into my briefcase. I had exactly 3 weeks to prepare my wardrobe, arrange my transportation, and perfect my strategy for the cocktail hour. The trap was set. All I had to do was walk through the front doors of the hotel and watch them step right into it. I arrived at the Beverly Hills Hotel precisely at 6 in the evening. The valet opened the door to my understated black town car. 8 years ago, I drove away from my parents' house in a sputtering sedan with heavy trash bags sitting in the trunk. Today, I stepped onto the pristine cobblestone driveway, wearing a tailored navy gown that cost more than their first mortgage. I wore no diamonds. I carried no flashy designer handbag. Real power does not need to sparkle, it just needs to be present. I walked through the gilded front doors and followed the signs toward the garden atrium. The cocktail hour was already in full swing. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted hors d'oeuvres, and fresh orchids. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated through the crowd with silver trays. A string quartet played a soft classical melody in the corner. 300 guests mingled under the towering glass ceiling. These were the elite members of the California medical community. I saw hospital board directors, chief surgeons, and wealthy private investors. This was the exact ecosystem my parents worshipped. I stayed on the perimeter of the room. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and stood near a towering floral arrangement. I did not mingle, I just watched. I was a ghost returning to a graveyard, only this time I held the deed to the property. Families built on prestige cannot help but boast, and boasting always reveals the hidden cracks in the foundation. I spotted my father first. Richard stood near an elaborate ice sculpture, holding a crystal glass of bourbon. He was holding court with 3 other older men. I recognized one of them as Dr. Wallace, the chief of staff at a rival medical center. I took a slow sip of my water and listened carefully. My father possessed a loud, booming voice, meant to carry across a room. "Victoria is doing incredible work out in Nevada," Richard bragged, puffing out his chest. "Her cosmetic practice in Henderson is booked solid for the next 14 months. She handles high-profile clients exclusively. Athletes, politicians. It is a very demanding schedule." Dr. Wallace nodded, looking suitably impressed. "It must be hard for her to step away for a wedding," Wallace noted. "She has a dedicated team handling the overflow," my father replied smoothly. "The Brown work ethic never stops. She is bringing that same elite standard into this marriage with Julian. 2 brilliant surgical minds joining forces. It really is a modern medical dynasty." Richard lied without a single hesitation. He drank his bourbon, soaking in the admiration of his peers. I stood behind the floral arrangement, my face perfectly still. He spun a beautiful fairy tale. But I had the resources of a corporate chief executive. I had run a rigorous background check on my sister the exact moment I received the wedding invitation. I had the official state board documents folded neatly inside my leather clutch. Victoria did not have a booming practice. The Nevada State Medical Board suspended her license 6 months ago. The official files detailed a horrific pattern of negligence. Victoria prioritized volume over safety. She botched a series of delicate facial reconstructions. When the patients returned with severe infections and tissue damage, she did not treat them. Instead, she altered their medical charts. She falsified the recovery instructions to make it look like the patients caused their own complications by ignoring her advice. She blamed the victims to protect her own flawless image. The board caught her. An anonymous nurse blew the whistle, handing over the original, unaltered digital files. Victoria lost her practice overnight. The state slapped her with heavy fines, and 2 former patients filed devastating civil lawsuits. My sister was drowning in 7-figure legal debt. She was flat broke. The luxurious cosmetic clinic in Henderson was currently sitting empty, locked behind a foreclosure notice. Yet here was my father standing in a luxury hotel, bragging about her 14-month waiting list. The hypocrisy turned my stomach. My family was bankrupting their morals to maintain a fragile illusion. They discarded me because I failed a standardized test, but they protected Victoria when she mutilated patients and lied to the government. I shifted my gaze across the atrium and located my mother. Evelyn floated from table to table in a pearl gray silk dress. She greeted the wealthiest guests, kissing cheeks and touching shoulders. Her eyes constantly darted toward the hired photographers, ensuring her best angles were captured for the society pages. She was securing social currency. She needed this wedding to look flawless because the family brand depended on it. I watched Evelyn laugh at a joke I could not hear. The realization hit me with sudden, sharp clarity. They knew. My parents knew exactly what Victoria did in Nevada. They knew she was suspended and facing financial ruin. That was the real reason they were pushing this grand wedding. They were not celebrating a romantic union. They were orchestrating a rescue mission. I thought about Dr. Julian Pierce. I thought about the earnest, exhausted trauma surgeon who spent his nights saving car crash victims. Julian possessed a pristine reputation. He was beloved by his patients and respected by every medical board in the state. More importantly, Julian commanded an emergency department backed by unlimited operational funding. The exact funding I provided through the Apex Foundation. Victoria was a parasite. She destroyed her own career, so she needed to attach herself to a new, healthy host. Marrying Julian gave her an immediate shield of respectability. If anyone questioned her past, she could just point to her brilliant, honorable husband. She could live off his salary. She could use his department resources to slowly rebuild her shattered credibility. She was using him to save herself. And my parents were helping her tie the knot before Julian discovered the truth. A cold fury settled into my chest. It was not the loud, reckless anger of a 25-year-old girl thrown onto the lawn. It was the quiet, calculated focus of a woman who held the power to stop a tragedy. Julian worked 80-hour weeks. He trusted the people around him because he operated with pure integrity. He assumed Victoria shared his values. He had no idea he was walking into a trap set by a family desperate to hide their own failures. The string quartet finished their song. The lead violinist lowered his bow. A tall man in a dark tuxedo stepped to the center of the atrium and tapped a small silver chime. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man announced, his voice echoing over the crowd, "the bride and groom request your presence in the main ballroom for the reception and dinner service. Please find your assigned tables." The crowd began to move. The wealthy doctors and administrators shuffled toward the heavy wooden doors leading to the grand ballroom. I saw my father finish his bourbon and hand the empty glass to a waiter. I saw my mother gather her silk skirt and glide toward the entrance, eager to take her place at the head table. I did not move right away. I stayed by the flowers, watching the room empty out. I felt the weight of the printed state board documents resting inside my clutch. I thought about the brass compass sitting on my desk back at the corporate headquarters. I had navigated through the darkest parts of the medical industry. I had built an empire from the dirt. I had earned the right to stand in this room. A waiter walked past me carrying a silver tray. I reached out and placed my untouched glass of sparkling water onto the polished metal. The reconnaissance was over. I had seen their faces. I had heard their lies. I understood exactly what was at stake. My sister thought she had outsmarted the system. My parents thought they had secured their legacy. They thought the doors were locked. I adjusted the strap of my navy gown and walked toward the grand ballroom. The trap was set, but it was not the trap my family intended. It was mine. I stepped through the heavy wooden doors, ready to let the entire house of cards collapse. I walked through the heavy wooden double doors of the grand ballroom just as the orchestra began playing a soft dinner waltz. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over 300 wealthy guests. Waiters in tailored jackets guided the elite members of the California medical community to their assigned tables. The room smelled of roasted tenderloin and expensive champagne. I bypassed the seating chart sitting on a silver easel near the entrance. I knew my name was not on it. I found a strategic spot in the back corner of the room, standing right next to a towering stone pillar. The shadows offered a slight shield, but I was still visible to anyone looking closely. I wanted them to come to me. I wanted them to walk away from their audience before the real conversation began. I stood there in my navy gown, holding my leather clutch tight against my side. I watched the guests settle into their chairs. I saw my father, Richard, laughing loudly with a hospital administrator near the front of the room. He looked so proud. He stood with his chest puffed out, holding a fresh drink. He thought his legacy was secure. He believed his golden child was about to cement their family name into the history books by marrying a rising star. I felt my pulse slow down, a steady rhythm beating against my ribs. 8 years ago, walking into a room full of these people would have triggered a severe panic attack. I would have worried about my posture, my clothes, and my worthiness to breathe the same air. I used to view them as untouchable gods in white coats. Now, looking at their forced smiles and their calculated networking, I just saw a room full of fragile egos. They built a grand illusion on the backs of patients they discarded. It took exactly 4 minutes for the radar to ping. I kept my eyes fixed on the head table located on a raised platform. My mother Evelyn was arranging her engraved place card. She turned around to hand her evening shawl to a passing waiter. Her gaze swept across the expansive room and landed directly on my corner. I watched the physical reaction happen in real time. The color drained from her perfectly contoured cheeks. Her shoulders went stiff, locking into place. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She recognized the face she had spent 8 years trying to erase. Evelyn did not hesitate. She handed the shawl away without looking at the waiter, excused herself from the table, and marched toward me. Her heels clicked against the polished parquet floor like a metronome ticking down to an explosion. She kept a tight, fake smile plastered on her face for the guests she passed. She nodded to colleagues, pretending she was simply checking on the catering staff. But as she crossed the invisible line into my corner, the smile vanished. Her eyes hardened into dark, unforgiving stones. She reached me, stepping quickly behind the shadow of the stone pillar to ensure the VIP tables could not see us. She reached out and grabbed my upper arm. Her manicured fingernails dug into the fabric of my dress. 8 years ago, that touch would have frozen me in place. But standing there today, I felt nothing but pity. Her grip was so weak. I spent 3 years lifting grown men out of wheelchairs. I guided trauma patients through agonizing physical therapy sessions. My mother spent her days holding lightweight surgical tools and sipping wine at country clubs. Her physical strength was non-existent compared to the resilience I had built. "Why is this defect here?" she hissed. She kept her voice trapped in her throat, a harsh whisper meant only for me. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I survived being thrown onto the street. Her first instinct was to demean me, to put me back in the box she built for me decades ago. I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I looked right back into her terrified eyes. She expected the frightened 25-year-old girl to apologize and run away. She expected me to shrink under her authority. "I am a guest, Evelyn," I replied, my voice calm and measured. Before my mother could process my lack of fear, a rustle of heavy white silk announced the arrival of the bride. Victoria had seen our mother storm across the room with a look of sheer panic. She abandoned her bridesmaids and followed her. She rounded the stone pillar, her pristine gown dragging across the floor. She took one look at me, and her carefully constructed bridal persona shattered into pieces. "You are not invited," Victoria spat. Her chest heaved. Her eyes darted around the room in a frantic rhythm, checking to see if any of the hospital board members were watching our corner. "Get out before I have security drag you out by your hair." I looked at my older sister. She was wearing a custom wedding dress that cost $20,000. She was about to marry a man who represented the pinnacle of medical integrity. Yet underneath the expensive silk and the flawless makeup, she was still the exact same cruel, desperate woman who stood on a porch and laughed at my eviction. They were so desperate, they were so small. They built their entire identity on keeping me at the bottom of the ladder. They could not comprehend that I had built my own ladder while they were busy polishing their mirrors. They thought I was still the poor girl crying on the lawn with trash bags. "Security won't help you, Victoria," I said calmly. I kept my tone even, refusing to give them the dramatic reaction they craved. "You might want to lower your voice. The chief of staff is sitting 2 tables away and you look terrified." My mother could not handle the defiance. She was used to absolute obedience from everyone in her orbit. The fact that I was standing my ground, looking them directly in the eye, broke her control. Her breathing turned shallow, the veins in her neck strained against her skin. Evelyn raised her hand. Her fingers curled slightly. She pulled her arm back, preparing to cause a physical scene. She wanted to slap me. She wanted to shock me into submission, to intimidate me into fleeing out the back exit like a frightened animal caught in a trap. I shifted my weight, prepared to block her wrist. I was not going to let her strike me, but I did not have to lift a finger. A tall figure stepped out from the other side of the thick stone pillar. He wore a sharp black tuxedo. His posture was rigid. Dr. Julian Pierce, the groom, had walked over to find his bride. He had been standing just out of sight in the alcove, waiting for Victoria to finish talking to her mother. He heard every single word. He heard Victoria threaten to have a woman dragged out by her hair. He heard the venom in her voice. He saw my mother, the respected chief of cardiology, raise her hand to strike a guest in the middle of a wedding reception. Julian stepped forward. The shadows fell away from his face. He looked at Evelyn, staring at her raised hand. Then he looked at Victoria, staring at the sneer twisting her beautiful face into something ugly and cruel. He did not say a word at first. He just stared at the two women he thought he understood. These were the women who claimed to represent the highest standards of dignity and grace in the medical community. His eyes, usually so warm and compassionate with his trauma patients, turned to ice. The illusion was broken, the trap was officially closed, and my family had no idea they were the ones standing inside it. Julian stepped directly between me and my mother. He moved with the swift, decisive action of a trauma surgeon responding to a critical emergency. He inserted his broad shoulders right into the line of fire, shielding me from the woman who gave birth to me. "Take your hand off her," Julian ordered. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a sharp, cutting authority that demanded instant obedience. My mother gasped. She yanked her hand back as if she had touched a hot stove. Her fingers hovered in the air for a fraction of a second before she tucked them against her side. Evelyn was a master of manipulation. I watched her survival instincts kick into overdrive. She immediately pasted a bright, fake smile onto her face. Her expression morphed from vicious rage to sweet, concerned matriarch in the blink of an eye. She tried to play the role of the protective mother shielding her future son-in-law from an unpleasant situation. "Julian, dear, there is a simple misunderstanding," Evelyn cooed, pitching her tone to sound gentle and reassuring. "This is just a disturbed, estranged relative. She struggles with her mental health. We are handling it quietly so she does not ruin your special evening." It was a brilliant, disgusting lie. She tried to weaponize the exact same narrative Victoria used to sabotage my commercial bank loan years ago. She painted me as crazy to invalidate my presence. She thought Julian would trust her pristine medical authority and walk away to let the family deal with their dirty laundry. Julian did not know. He did not agree. In fact, he completely ignored his future mother-in-law. He turned his back to Evelyn and focused his entire attention on me. "Agatha," Julian said, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What is going on here?" He knew me. He recognized the tailored blazer, style, the posture, the direct eye contact we shared during our coffee shop meeting. He knew I was the anonymous benefactor keeping his emergency department alive. But seeing me standing in the corner of his wedding reception, being verbally assaulted by his bride and her mother, short-circuited his brain. He could not connect the two realities. Victoria stepped forward, her expensive white silk dress swishing against the parquet floor. She reached out and placed a trembling hand on Julian's tuxedo sleeve. Her face was pale. She felt the control slipping through her fingers, but she desperately tried to maintain her carefully constructed facade. "You know this gatecrasher, babe?" Victoria laughed nervously. The sound was high-pitched and brittle. "Why are you talking to her? Security is on the way to escort her out." That specific word was the catalyst. Gatecrasher. Julian turned his head and stared at his beautiful bride. He looked at the woman he was supposed to marry in less than 2 hours. He saw the genuine venom swimming in her eyes. He saw the cruel, dismissive way she looked at me. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place inside his sharp, analytical mind. "Gatecrasher," Julian repeated. His voice dropped an octave. The warmth drained completely from his face, replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. "Victoria, how dare you?" The low hum of conversation at the nearby tables began to falter. Guests sitting close to our corners stopped eating their roasted tenderloin. They turned their heads, their curiosity piqued by the sudden shift in tone. Julian did not care who was listening. He did not care about preserving the elegant atmosphere of the Beverly Hills Hotel. He only cared about the truth. "This woman is Agatha Brown," Julian declared, his voice echoing over the soft jazz music playing from the orchestra pit. My mother flinched hearing my full name spoken with such reverence. Victoria took a step back, dropping her hand from his arm. "She is the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Recovery," Julian continued, his words striking the air like a gavel. "Her foundation is the sole financial backer of my entire trauma department. She single-handedly funded the new surgical suites you have been bragging about to your friends all night. She is the most brilliant medical mind I have ever met." The silence that followed was absolute. It was not a gradual quiet. It was an instant, suffocating vacuum of sound. The orchestra stopped playing mid-measure. Waiters froze in place, holding silver trays of champagne perfectly still. 300 doctors, hospital administrators, and wealthy socialites heard every single word Julian said. This crowd knew the name Apex Recovery. They knew it very well. Apex was the undisputed gold standard for post-operative care in California. Half the chief surgeons in that ballroom fought tooth and nail to secure exclusive contracts with my facilities. They spent years trying to uncover the identity of the phantom CEO who revolutionized their industry. They wanted to court the Apex executives, hoping to earn a slice of the massive profits my company generated. And now the golden boy of the Los Angeles medical scene just handed them the answer. The Phantom Queen was standing in the back corner of the room wearing a navy gown. Even worse for my parents, the crowd heard my last name, Agatha Brown. The elite guests were highly educated, intelligent people. It took them less than 10 seconds to do the mental math. They looked at Richard Brown standing frozen near the ice sculpture. They looked at Evelyn Brown standing near the stone pillar. They looked at me. The physical resemblance was undeniable. We shared the same dark hair and the same sharp jawline. The rumors of the Brown family casting out their youngest daughter were ancient country club gossip. Everyone assumed the banished daughter ended up working a minimum wage job or living on the streets. Nobody ever imagined the discarded child climbed her way to the absolute top of the healthcare food chain. I watched my mother process the information. Evelyn stared at me, her jaw literally dropping open. Her perfectly applied lipstick parted as she gasped for air. The complex, arrogant machinery of her brain violently stalled. She could not compute the data. She had just called me a defect. She had just threatened to throw me out. And Julian just informed her that her entire social circle worshipped the ground I walked on. Victoria looked even worse. The blood completely vanished from her face, leaving her skin an unhealthy, chalky white. Her eyes darted from Julian to me, wide with sheer terror. She knew she was marrying Julian to save herself from her own hidden malpractice scandal. She needed his department funding to secure her future. Now she realized the person controlling that exact funding was the sister she evicted and tried to destroy. I did not say a single word. I did not have to. I stood tall against the stone pillar, my shoulders relaxed, my chin held high. I let the heavy, crushing weight of Julian's revelation press down on my mother and sister. 8 years ago, they forced me to sit in silence at the dining room table while they stripped away my dignity. Tonight, I forced them to stand in silence while Julian stripped away their power. The ugly high school grad was not sleeping in the gutter. The girl who failed her entrance exams did not settle for a simple life within her limitations. I was the bank. I was the boss. I held the leash to the pristine surgeon they so desperately wanted to claim as their own. I looked at Evelyn. I saw the exact moment her panic mutated into something else entirely. She realized her entire family brand was standing on the edge of a cliff. 300 important people were watching her. She needed to fix this immediately. She needed to spin the narrative before the whispers turned into a scandal that would ruin her country club reputation forever. I watched her take a deep breath. I knew exactly what she was going to do next. She was a woman who survived by rewriting history, and she was about to give the most desperate, sickening performance of her entire life to claim my empire as her own. Survival instinct is a terrifying thing to witness up close. Most people assume that when a liar gets caught, they break down and confess. But people like my mother do not confess, they adapt. They rewrite history on the spot. The silence in the grand ballroom felt heavy enough to crush bone. 300 guests stared at our corner, holding their breath. I could hear the faint clinking of ice melting in water glasses at the nearby tables. Evelyn stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds. I watched her dark eyes dart from Julian to me and then out toward the audience of hospital directors and wealthy investors watching her every move. Her brain operated like a high-speed calculator. She recognized that her original plan was dead. She could not throw me out. She could not label me a disturbed relative because Julian had just crowned me the queen of their entire industry. If she rejected me now, she would look like a fool who alienated the most powerful CEO in the room. So she pivoted. I watched the panic drain out of her face, replaced instantly by a mask of manufactured pride. She smoothed the wrinkles from her pearl gray silk dress, stood up straight, and took a step toward me. She opened her arms, pitching her voice loud enough for the rival surgeons at the VIP tables to hear every single syllable. "Agatha, my brilliant girl," my mother announced, her tone dripping with fake maternal warmth. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. People leaned in, desperate to watch the family reunion unfold. Evelyn stepped right into my personal space. She reached out and placed her manicured hand directly onto my shoulder. It was the first time she had touched me in 8 years. Her fingers felt cold and rigid against the fabric of my navy gown. "We always knew you had the brown drive," Evelyn projected, beaming at the audience before turning her fake smile back to me. "We knew you were destined for greatness. That is why we had to be so hard on you. We pushed you out of the nest so you could soar. And just look at what you have built. You created a true family legacy." It was the most sickening performance I had ever witnessed. She was trying to claim my empire as her own parenting victory. She took the trauma she inflicted upon me, the eviction, the cruel insults, the trash bags on the lawn, and tried to rebrand it as tough love. She wanted these 300 important guests to believe she was a mastermind mother who sacrificed her own relationship with her daughter just to motivate me to succeed. She wanted the credit for the tears I shed in that cheap motel room. She wanted the credit for the double shifts I worked at the rundown physical therapy clinic. She wanted to stand in the spotlight of my success and cast her own shadow over it. Victoria caught on to the strategy instantly. My sister possessed the exact same survival instincts. She realized that if our mother could successfully claim me, the Brown family brand would double in value. More importantly, Victoria needed my money. She needed Julian to secure his trauma department funding, so she could hide behind his pristine reputation. If playing the loving sister kept the funding alive, she was willing to perform the role. Victoria stepped forward, her expensive white wedding gown rustling against the parquet floor. She squeezed her eyes shut for a brief second, forcing tears to pool in her lower lashes. She clasped her hands together, holding her bouquet of white roses against her chest. "We are so proud of you, sis," Victoria choked out. Her voice trembled. But I had spent years reading the physical cues of patients in pain, and I knew how to spot a fake tremor. Her hands were shaking because she was terrified, not because she was moved. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "I missed you so much, Agatha." Victoria continued, stepping closer. "Mom is right. We just wanted you to find your own path, and you did. You are incredible. This is the best wedding gift I could have ever asked for, having my sister back." I stood perfectly still, letting their lies hang in the air. Julian watched this sudden display of family affection with deep confusion. Just 2 minutes ago, his bride threatened to have me dragged out by my hair. Now she was weeping tears of joy and calling me her greatest gift. He looked at Evelyn, who was still gripping my shoulder, and his sharp, analytical mind struggled to connect the two opposing realities. They wanted to sweep 8 years of abuse under the rug to access my power. They wanted me to smile hug them back and validate their fairy tale in front of the California medical elite. They expected the old Agatha to emerge, the desperate young girl who used to crave their approval more than oxygen. I did not yell, I did not scream. Raising my voice would have given them the dramatic scene they could use to paint me as the unstable one. I kept my breathing slow and steady. I looked down at my mother's hand resting on my shoulder. I stared at her expensive diamond rings. I remembered that exact same hand pointing toward the front door on the night she banished me. I reached up with my right hand. I did not swat her away. I did not shove her. I placed my fingers around her thin wrist and squeezed just hard enough to let her know she was no longer the strongest person in the room. I lifted her hand off my body with surgical precision. Evelyn blinked, her fake smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She tried to resist trying to keep her hand anchored to my shoulder to maintain the illusion of control. I shifted my weight and pushed her arm back toward her own chest, forcing her to step away from me. I looked her dead in the eye. The silence in the ballroom deepened. The guests were hanging on my every move. "I am not your girl," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried across the dead, silent room, echoing off the high-vaulted ceilings. The words struck my mother like a physical blow. She recoiled, her posture stiffening. "Do not stand there and claim my sweat as your victory," I continued, keeping my tone ice-cold. "You did not push me out of the nest to help me soar. You threw me into the dirt because you needed a dumping ground for your own insecurities. You called me a genetic defect. You packed my belongings in garbage bags. You told me to never call you again." A unified gasp rose from the nearby tables. Dr. Wallace, the rival chief of staff, leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide with shock. The pristine image of the loving Brown family was crumbling in real time. Evelyn opened her mouth, stammering, trying to find a lie to plug the massive hole in her sinking ship. "Agatha, please, you are emotional. We can discuss this in private." "There is nothing private about this family, Evelyn," I replied. "You live for an audience. Well, you have one." I turned my attention to Victoria. My sister took a step backward, the fake tears drying up instantly. The fear returning to her eyes was raw and genuine. She recognized that the loving sister routine had failed. She gripped her bouquet so tightly her knuckles turned white. "And you, Victoria," I said, my voice dropping lower, "you did not want me to find my own path. You called the compliance office at Pacific Trust Bank and told your boyfriend I was an unstable thief just to sabotage my first business loan. You tried to ruin my life before it even started." Julian turned his head so fast his neck cracked. He stared at his bride. "You did what?" Julian demanded, his voice thick with disgust. Victoria shook her head frantically, stepping toward him. "Julian, she is lying. She is just trying to cause drama. You know me." Julian held his hand up, stopping her in her tracks. "Do not lie to me right now, Victoria. I know exactly who Agatha is. I trust her data with the lives of my patients. I do not trust a single word coming out of your mouth." I looked at the three of them. My mother shivering in her silk dress, my sister panicking in her wedding gown, and the honorable groom realizing he was standing in the middle of a nightmare. I reached into my leather clutch. My fingers brushed against the folded state board documents I had printed earlier that afternoon. I felt the crisp paper waiting to be unleashed. The compass my grandmother gave me had guided me to this exact moment, to this exact room. "I am the CEO of Apex Recovery," I stated clearly, ensuring every person in the room heard my final verdict on their twisted family dynamic. "I built an empire from the scraps you threw away. I own my success, I own my name, and I do not share a legacy with frauds." The word frauds hit the air like a localized earthquake. It was the ultimate insult to a family that worshipped prestige. It was a direct attack on their core identity. My father, Richard, finally broke his paralysis and marched over from the ice sculpture, his face flushed red with anger. He heard the insult and intended to defend his brand. But I held the ultimate weapon, and it was time to drop the final boulder on their glass castle. Julian was already looking at Victoria with deep suspicion. He just needed the final push to realize the woman he was about to marry was the biggest fraud of them all. Richard heard the word frauds and marched over from the ice sculpture, his face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He was the patriarch of the Brown family. He was a man used to giving orders in operating rooms and having nurses scramble to obey. He thought he could use that same intimidating presence to silence me. He pushed past a waiter, pointing a thick finger directly at my chest. "Agatha, you will leave this property right now," Richard barked, trying to keep his tone low enough to avoid a total spectacle, but failing. "You have no right to stand here and insult your mother. You have no right to disrupt your sister on her special day." I looked at my father. He looked old. The arrogance that usually held his posture together was cracking under the weight of the audience watching us. "I did not disrupt anything, Richard," I replied, refusing to use his parental title. "I just turned on the lights." Victoria could not maintain her fake tears for another second. The fragile, loving sister persona shattered into a million jagged pieces. She dropped her expensive bouquet of white roses. The flowers hit the polished parquet floor with a soft thud, scattering petals across the wood. She stepped forward, her face twisted into a feral snarl. "You jealous witch!" Victoria screamed, losing every single ounce of her refined bridal elegance. Her voice cracked, echoing loudly over the quiet music. "You came here just to ruin my perfect day. You could not stand the fact that I was getting a happy ending while you sat alone in your miserable life." She hurled the insults like stones, hoping one of them would hit a nerve. But I was wearing armor she could not pierce. I ignored her outburst. I turned my body slightly, directing my attention entirely to the groom. Julian was watching his bride as if a stranger had just possessed her body. He saw the venom. He saw the genuine hatred radiating from the woman he planned to marry in less than 2 hours. "Julian, I said, keeping my voice remarkably calm against the backdrop of her screaming. "I came here tonight because you invited me. I respect you. I respect your surgical talent and your dedication to your patients. That is why you need to ask your bride a very important question." Julian stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "What question?" "You need to ask her why her Nevada medical license was suspended for severe malpractice 6 months ago," I stated clearly. The words landed like a physical strike. Victoria shrieked. She lunged forward, her hands raised, aiming her manicured fingernails right for my face. She wanted to claw my eyes out. She wanted to physically stop the truth from leaving my lips. I did not even have to brace myself. Julian intercepted her instantly. He caught her wrist midair. His grip was firm and unyielding, the grip of a trauma surgeon who knew exactly how to immobilize a frantic patient. He held her arm suspended between us, his face pale with horror. "What did she just say?" Julian demanded. He did not look at me. He stared directly into Victoria's panicked eyes. "Let go of me!" Victoria cried, struggling against his hold. "She is lying, Julian. She is a bitter, vindictive liar." My father rushed forward, stammering, desperate to run damage control. He placed a hand on Julian's shoulder, trying to project his usual commanding authority. Julian's son Richard pleaded, sweating profusely under the chandelier lights. "Do not listen to this nonsense. It is a minor administrative dispute, a simple clerical error regarding some outdated billing codes with the state board. We have a legal team clearing it up as we speak. It is nothing." "A minor administrative dispute," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. I reached into my leather clutch and pulled out the folded state board documents I had printed that afternoon. I held the thick stack of papers out toward Julian. "I doubt the state of Nevada revokes a medical license over a clerical error." Julian released Victoria's wrist. He snatched the papers from my hand. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the crisp sound of the paper unfolding in his hands. Julian's eyes darted back and forth across the page. He read the official government letterhead. He read the summary of the investigation. He read the exact phrases detailed in the disciplinary report. "Gross negligence." Julian read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Falsified patient recovery charts, permanent tissue damage, 2 pending civil lawsuits." He looked up. He looked at Richard, who was suddenly staring at the floor, unable to meet the gaze of an honest man. He looked at Evelyn, who was trembling in her pearl gray silk dress, her hands covering her mouth. Finally, he looked at Victoria. "You mutilated patients," Julian said, the disgust practically dripping from his tongue, "and you altered their charts to cover it up." "Julian, I can explain," Victoria begged, reaching for him again. He took a large step backward, treating her like she was radioactive. "Do not touch me," he ordered. "You told me your practice was booked solid. You told me you were relocating to Los Angeles just to be closer to me. You lied to my face every single day." "She did not relocate for love, Julian." I interjected, my tone flat and relentless. "She is flat broke. She is drowning in 7 figures of legal debt. She is marrying you because she needs your pristine reputation to shield her from the fallout. And more importantly, she needs your department funding to bail herself out." Victoria glared at me, her chest heaving. "You do not know anything about his department." "I know everything about his department, Victoria," I replied, holding her furious gaze, "because I am the one financing it." Julian looked at me, the final realization dawning on his face. The pieces clicked together. He understood why I knew so much about his trauma wing. He understood why a mysterious corporate foundation dropped millions into his budget. "She is marrying you for the Apex Foundation money," I stated, ensuring the surrounding tables heard the motive. "And she did not realize that I am the person who signs those checks." The hospital board members sitting at table 1 were no longer pretending to eat their salads. Dr. Wallace, the rival chief of staff, had his smartphone out. 2 other executives were already texting frantically under the table. The California medical community thrives on gossip, and I had just handed them the scandal of the decade. The Brown family brand was dead. I was watching the autopsy happen in real time. My father tried one last pathetic maneuver. He puffed out his chest, attempting to salvage a shred of dignity. "You listen to me, Agatha," Richard threatened, his voice shaking with impotent rage. "You think you can walk in here and ruin us? I will call my lawyers. I will have your little corporate empire investigated for slander. I will destroy your company." I looked at the man who threw me onto the lawn 8 years ago. I felt no fear. I felt no intimidation. "You cannot afford your lawyers anymore, Richard," I replied smoothly, "because as of this exact moment, Apex Recovery is officially auditing all partnerships associated with the Brown family. Any clinic, any hospital, any private practice doing business with you will be flagged for compliance review." The threat carried a terrifying weight. If Apex Recovery flagged a hospital, that hospital lost millions in transition care funding. I was effectively blacklisting my own parents from the medical ecosystem they spent 30 years building. The executives at the VIP tables began shifting uncomfortably in their seats, mentally calculating how quickly they needed to sever ties with Richard and Evelyn to save their own lucrative contracts. I did not need to yell. I did not need to scream or cause a physical scene. The truth does not need volume. It just needs gravity. And I had just dropped a massive boulder onto their fragile glass castle. The cracks were spreading fast and the entire structure was about to cave in on their heads. Julian stared at the printed state board documents resting in his hands. He read the words detailing my sister's negligence one more time. The thick paper trembled slightly between his fingers. He looked at Victoria. He did not see a beautiful bride standing before him anymore. He saw a profound liability. He saw a woman who mutilated innocent people, altered medical records to blame the victims, and tried to hide behind his unblemished reputation to escape the consequences. He let the paper slip from his grip. The crisp white sheets drifted through the air and scattered across the polished wood floor like dead leaves. "The wedding is off," Julian announced. He did not raise his voice. He did not yell. The quiet certainty in his tone cut through the tense silence of the ballroom, louder than a gunshot. He turned his back on the woman he almost married. Victoria lunged forward, her hands grasping at the dark fabric of his tuxedo jacket in a desperate panic. "Julian, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You cannot do this. We can fix this. Let me explain." Julian stopped. He did not turn around to face her. He simply reached down, took her wrist, and peeled her fingers off his jacket, as if her touch carried a deadly virus. He dropped her hand. He strode down the center aisle, marching past the towering floral centerpieces, the untouched crystal glasses, and the rows of stunned guests. He pushed through the heavy wooden double doors and disappeared into the hotel lobby. Victoria realized her host was gone. The prestigious shield she needed to survive just walked out of the building, taking her only chance at a financial rescue with him. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the parquet floor. The heavy white silk of her custom designer gown bunched up around her, looking like a deflated parachute. She began to wail. It was not a sound of heartbreak or lost love. It was the grating, furious cry of a spoiled child realizing she could no longer manipulate her way out of a consequence. She pounded her fists against the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. My mother saw the narrative slipping permanently out of her grasp. Evelyn realized her family brand was currently dying in front of the most important people in her social circle. She resorted to her oldest, most reliable trick. She gasped loudly, bringing a trembling hand to her chest. She leaned heavily against the stone pillar, her eyes fluttering shut, her face twisting into a mask of sudden agony. "My heart," Evelyn moaned, staging a textbook panic attack to garner immediate sympathy. In any other room at any other social gathering, a dozen people would have rushed to her aid. But this room was filled with 300 seasoned medical professionals. They spent their entire lives diagnosing real emergencies. They looked at Evelyn leaning against the stone and they noticed the lack of pallor in her skin. They noticed her breathing was controlled. They knew the difference between true cardiac distress and a desperate theatrical performance meant to distract from a scandal. Not a single person stepped forward. Dr. Wallace, the rival chief of staff, took a slow sip of his water and turned his head away. Evelyn opened one eye, peering through her eyelashes, expecting a crowd of concerned colleagues to surround her. She saw nothing but disgusted, unblinking stares. She realized her audience had abandoned her. She stopped panting, stood up straight, and brushed a piece of lint off her pearl gray silk dress. The fake medical emergency vanished instantly. The ultimate rejection for a narcissist is an empty stage, and I had just turned the lights out on hers. The California medical community operates like a shark tank. When the water is clear and the money is flowing, everyone swims together. The moment blood hits the water, the pack turns on the wounded to protect their own interests. By exposing Victoria's hidden malpractice and threatening to audit the family partnerships, I vaporized my parents' social standing in a matter of seconds. They were no longer respected pioneers of orthopedic surgery and cardiology. They were accessories to a severe fraud. Richard stood near the head table, attempting to salvage his dignity. He caught the eye of a hospital board member he played golf with every Sunday. The board member did not smile. He simply picked up his wife's evening wrap, placed his hand on her lower back, and guided her toward the coat check. That single movement triggered a chain reaction. Chairs scraped loudly against the floorboards. Wealthy investors, chief surgeons, and elite administrators abandoned their assigned seats. They left their untouched tenderloin dinners sitting on the fine china. They grabbed their coats and their expensive purses. They fled the reception before the salads even arrived. Nobody wanted to be photographed near the Brown family. Nobody wanted Apex recovery auditors finding a connection between their private clinics and Richard's disgraced practice. Association with my parents was now a financial liability. I watched the mass exodus from my quiet corner in the shadows. The grand ballroom, which cost a small fortune to rent, emptied out in less than 10 minutes. The string quartet packed up their instruments and slipped out a side door without waiting for their final payment. The waiters stood frozen near the kitchen swinging doors, unsure if they should clear the tables or leave the ruined party alone. Soon, the only people left in the center of the expansive room were my father, my mother, and my sobbing sister sitting in a pile of ruined white silk. Richard stood alone amidst the abandoned tables. His kingdom was gone. His legacy was reduced to ash. He turned his head and looked at me. The arrogance that defined his posture for 30 years evaporated into the cold air. He looked old, frail, and entirely hollow. He stared at the daughter he evicted 8 years ago. I saw the exact moment the truth pierced his ego. He realized I did not just survive his cruelty, I harnessed it. He traded his youngest child for prestige, and now he possessed neither. He forged a weapon out of his own neglect, and tonight that weapon dismantled his entire life. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer an apology he did not mean, or to issue another empty threat, but no words came out. His currency was worthless here. He finally saw me, really saw me, and realized I was the executioner they had built with their own hands. I did not offer him a parting insult. I did not gloat. I did not demand an apology. Silence is the heaviest burden you can leave on the shoulders of people who crave attention and validation. I adjusted the thin strap of my navy gown. I reached down and picked up my leather clutch from the small cocktail table. I turned my back on my mother, my father, and the sister who thought she could keep me in the dirt forever. I walked down the center aisle, following the exact path Julian took minutes earlier. My heels clicked a steady, victorious rhythm against the wood floor. The brass compass sat heavy in my pocket, anchoring me to the present. It reminded me that true north was not found in country clubs or prestigious medical degrees. True north was found in resilience. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out of the Beverly Hills Hotel. The cool, refreshing Los Angeles night air brushed against my face. I walked toward the valet stand with my spine perfectly straight. I did not look back. There was nothing left in that room for me anyway. The empire they worshipped was crumbling to the ground, and it was finally time for me to go home to the real table I had built. 6 months have passed since the heavy wooden doors of the Beverly Hills Hotel closed behind me. The collapse of the Brown medical dynasty did not happen overnight. It happened the way a rotting tree falls in the forest. The roots decay in the dark for years, and then one strong gust of wind brings the entire structure crashing into the dirt. I provided the wind. The Monday morning following the ruined wedding, Dr. Wallace called an emergency meeting of the Regional Hospital Board. The medical community is a vicious ecosystem. They do not tolerate public embarrassment. The board launched a quiet, ruthless investigation into my parents. They ordered a thorough audit of Richard and Evelyn. The auditors did not find a minor clerical error. They found a deliberate paper trail. The investigators discovered that my father used his substantial influence and personal funds to suppress the early patient complaints against Victoria in Nevada. He tried to buy the silence of the victims before the state medical board intervened. My mother authorized the transfer of the hush money through a shell account. They were accessories to severe medical fraud. The board gave Richard and Evelyn a brutal ultimatum. They could face a highly publicized ethics hearing, which would result in the permanent revocation of their medical licenses and potential criminal charges. Or they could sign documents agreeing to an immediate, permanent, early retirement. My parents chose the coward's way out. They signed the papers. They surrendered their hospital privileges. They cleaned out their corner offices in the middle of the night to avoid facing their colleagues. Today, they sit alone in their sprawling, empty Beverly Hills mansion. The country club quietly declined to renew their membership. The phone never rings. The elite social circles they worshipped erased them from the guest lists. The oppressive silence they used to weaponize against me is now their only companion. My sister faced a much harsher reality. The civil lawsuits in Nevada drained her remaining bank accounts. The state permanently revoked her medical license. With no wealthy husband to bail her out and parents who could no longer afford to fund her luxurious lifestyle, Victoria had to face the real world. The creditors repossessed her expensive sports car. She lost her luxury apartment. She had to find immediate employment just to avoid bankruptcy. Today, Victoria works as a front desk receptionist at a discount medical spa located in a rundown strip mall. She sits behind a fake marble counter, answering phones and booking appointments for cheap Botox injections. She wears a generic polyester uniform instead of a custom-tailored white coat. Last week, one of my clinic directors stopped by that exact strip mall to pick up lunch. She saw Victoria wiping down the waiting room chairs with a spray bottle of disinfectant. The sister who stood in my bedroom 8 years ago laughing and telling me I should settle for a simple receptionist job is now living that exact reality. She is buried under a mountain of legal debt, fetching coffee for the same type of estheticians she used to mock. As for Dr. Julian Pierce, the honorable trauma surgeon walked away from the ballroom and never looked back. The very next morning, he filed the legal paperwork to cancel the marriage license. 2 weeks later, he requested a formal meeting at my corporate office. He did not come as a groom seeking revenge. He came as a dedicated doctor seeking clarity. He sat across from my mahogany desk, looking exhausted but deeply relieved. Julian thanked me. He looked me in the eye and told me I saved his life. He admitted he had ignored several red flags regarding Victoria because he wanted to believe in the pristine image her family projected. I handed him a fresh cup of coffee and told him the truth. I told him the Apex Foundation funding would remain entirely untouched. His trauma department would continue to receive the millions of dollars required to save lives. I only required one strict condition. He had to sever every single tie with the Brown family. He agreed without a second of hesitation. Julian went back to the operating room, focusing his brilliant mind entirely on the patients who needed him most. He is currently spearheading a new emergency protocol that is saving countless lives. That brings us to today. It is Thursday afternoon, Thanksgiving Day. 8 years ago, I sat at a long mahogany table eating prime rib while my mother called me a genetic defect. I washed their crystal glasses in silence, and 2 days later, I packed my life into trash bags. I spent my Thanksgiving that year eating a cold sandwich in my beat-up sedan, wondering if I would ever belong anywhere. Today, I am sitting in the grand boardroom of the new Apex Recovery corporate headquarters in downtown Los Angeles. We pushed 4 large executive tables together to create one expansive dining space. The room smells of roasted turkey, fresh rosemary, and warm pie. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a stunning view of the city skyline, but the real beauty is sitting right here, inside this room. Instead of a toxic competitive family dinner, my table is full of my chosen family. Thomas Vance sits to my right. The billionaire tech developer who funded my dream is currently arguing good-naturedly about football statistics with my lead physical therapist. Arthur, the retired mechanic who became my very first success story in East Los Angeles, sits across from me. He drove here himself, his spine strong, his spirit unbroken. He brought a homemade casserole that everyone is fighting over. My top facility directors, their spouses, and their children fill the rest of the chairs. The room rings with genuine laughter, loud conversations, and pure, unfiltered warmth. I look down this long table and realize something profound. Nobody sitting in this room is wearing a white coat. Nobody here demands to see a framed diploma or a bank statement before passing the potatoes. We do not grade each other on prestige, social standing, or the zip code we live in. We value grit, loyalty, and basic human respect. We know what it means to struggle, and we know what it means to build something from the ground up. Love is the only currency accepted in this room, and nobody has to pass a standardized test to earn it. If you are watching this and a family member has ever made you feel like you have to beg for a seat at their table, I need you to hear this loud and clear. Stop begging. A table that requires you to shrink yourself just to fit in is not a table worth sitting at. Love that comes with an invoice is not love. It is a transaction. When they hand you rejection, take it. When they throw bricks at your head, pick them up. Use those exact bricks to build your own headquarters. The best revenge in the world is not screaming at them. It is not plotting ways to ruin their lives. The universe takes care of that on its own. The ultimate revenge is simply walking away and proving that your life is an absolute masterpiece without them in it. You are the architect of your own future. Do not let anyone who treats you like dirt tell you how high you can build. That is my story. A discarded compass, a broken medical system, and a ballroom reckoning that set everything right. Drop a comment below if you are building your own table today. Tell me who is sitting at it with you. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story, and I will see you in the next one.